Hello, I'm Father Anthony Cekada. Welcome to broadcast number 5 for the Philothea Press bestseller, Work of Human Hands, a theological critique of the Mass of Paul VI. To order Work of Human Hands and to read excerpts, visit www.philotheapress.com. Chapter 5, the 1969 General Instruction, the Mass as Assembly. In our first broadcast, we mentioned the positive qualities so many Catholics now see in the traditional Latin Mass: its dignity, its reverence, its roots in tradition. We also said that these qualities indicated an underlying doctrinal difference between the Old Mass and the Mass of Paul VI, one that affected the prayers and the ritual gestures of the Mass of Paul VI. Ample evidence for this underlying difference is found in the subject for this broadcast, the 1969 General Instruction on the Roman Missal. The 1969 General Instruction was a 341-paragraph Latin document bound in the front of the first printed edition of the New Order of Mass of Paul VI. It contained all the ritual directions for celebrating the new form of Mass. But the document was intended to be more than that. The creators of the new Mass envisioned the instruction as a theological exposition or a doctrinal presentation to help people understand the nature and significance of the elements of the new rite. As such, the 1969 General Instruction should be treated as the theological blueprint for the Mass of Paul VI. What does this blueprint tell us about the theology behind the new rite? Is it the same as the old theology of the Mass? We begin with a definition. Traditional Catholic theology defines the essence of the Mass as a sacrifice. Article 7 of the 1969 General Instruction, however, defines the Mass as an assembly. Here is the definition. The Lord's Supper, or Mass, is the sacred assembly or congregation of the people of God gathering together with a priest presiding in order to celebrate the memorial of the Lord. For this reason, Christ's promise applies supremely to such a local gathering of the Church. Where 2 or 3 come together in my name, there am I in their midst. What are some of the problems with this? Lord's Supper is a term favored by Protestants, who do not use the word Mass. Assembly was substituted for sacrifice. People of God is a Vatican II term that includes non-Catholics. The priest merely presides, and the assembly celebrates. The equivocal term memorial is used. It is understood in a heretical sense by Protestants and in an orthodox sense by Catholics. Instead of the presence of Christ being substantial through the miracle of transubstantiation, it is depicted as just somehow spiritual in the assembly. This new definition originates in the assembly theology of the Mass proposed by Louis Bouillet in his 1954 work, Liturgical Piety. We've already mentioned Bouillet and his ideas in broadcast 2. Where did Bouillet get this particular idea? In Liturgical Piety, he says he bases it on the Eucharistic teaching of Yngve Berlioth, a 1930s Swedish Lutheran and ecumenist. Bouillet's book is filled with praise for the theories Berlioth laid out in his own book, Eucharistic Faith and Practice, Evangelical and Catholic. So, it's no surprise to hear an ecumenist like Father J.M. Thiard praise the new definition of the Mass found in the 1969 General Instruction. He says that terms in the definition like Lord's Supper, people of God, and memorial were adopted in an explicitly ecumenical spirit and were the fruits of doctrinal convergence with non-Catholics. Nor is it surprising to read the critical comment that a conservative liturgist, Monsignor Klaus Gamber, made about the same passage. Almost any believing Protestant, of whatever denomination would be able to assent to such a definition. Other ideas from the Bouyer-Brillioth ecumenical theology pop up throughout the 1969 General Instruction. For instance, the document speaks of various presences of Christ at Mass, in the assembled people, in the priest who presides, and in Scripture. All these presences now are supposedly real. Transubstantiation, however, the real presence of Christ at Mass, was not mentioned. The term is detested by modernists because it reflects traditional Thomistic theology, and by Protestants as repugnant to the plain words of Scripture. Chapter 5 of Work of Human Hands examines these and other elements of the assembly theology of the Mass presented in the 1969 General Instruction. In addition to these doctrinal questions, Chapter 5 also explains how the General Instruction deregulated large portions of the Mass. In the decree promulgating his new Mass, Paul VI says it provides for legitimate variations and adaptations. In practice, this meant that the official legislation for the new rite allowed priests or parish liturgy committees to select one text or rite from a number of options, to omit or adapt certain texts or rites, and in many cases to introduce or invent texts as they saw fit. This has always been a sore point for conservatives, and explains why a Catholic never knows what to expect when he walks into an unfamiliar church for Mass. Will the style be American suburban casual? High-toned aestheticism downtown with chunks of Latin? Newman Center feel-good? The rite of EWTN? Or even Mexican mariachi? You never know what you'll run into. Even worse, deregulation leaves large chunks of the doctrinal content of the Mass up to individual priests and parish liturgy planners. In many cases, it leaves them free to introduce into liturgical prayer virtually any religious idea they want. They determine the lex orandi for each Sunday, your law of praying. So they also determine your lex credendi, your law of believing. I'm sure they're all really very nice folks, but it's crazy that the official norms governing the Mass of Paul VI allow them to do this. Public prayer affects common beliefs. If error creeps into public prayer, it will poison common beliefs. Conceived in ecumenical assembly theology and deregulated in its form of celebration, no wonder the Old Mass and the New Mass seem to be in two different theological universes. But we've only touched upon a few points here. To find out the rest about the 1969 General Instruction, its new theology of the Mass and its deregulation of the liturgy, read The Mass as Assembly, Chapter 5 of Work of Human Hands, a theological critique of the Mass of Paul VI. Our next broadcast, The Cleverness of the Revisers. To order Work of Human Hands and to read excerpts, visit www.philotheapress.com.